You mentioned before about Ridge being a $1 billion company, and that is your current mission. And after that, you are trying to build a different company that either gets to 10 billion or 100 billion. And when do you like you're a real forward thinker in terms of what you want and what you want to optimize for. And I'm curious, like, when you made those realizations about both of them.
Uh, I mean, I remember sitting down with my CMO, Connor, in 2017. So this is before we merged with Ridge, right? I used to own an ad agency business. Me and Connor came on board with Ridge. Now there's like five of us that own the whole thing. Um, and I remember being like, we can get Ridge to $100 million. And he's like, me and you can't. I'm like, bet. I'm like, I totally think we can. And so anyway, I rub that in his face all the time. And if Connor's listening, I'm going to rub it in his face again. But yeah, when I started going down the path of like, okay, what does it take to get to $100 million, and like really understanding public comps, right? Because like you talk to a lot of people like, oh, I want to build $1 billion business, right? And it's like, okay, well, what's your industry, right? It's like I'm just gonna keep picking on agencies because that's my background. It's like, oh, I'm gonna build $1 billion business. I'm like, there's no $1 billion agencies. There's one, right? Like, and
What is it?
I think it's called like WMC or something, right?
Okay.
It's public. They own like 50 agencies.
Gotcha.
And it's definitely not their name. I can't remember it right now. But I'm like, yeah, there's one of them. So you will not build $1 billion agency, right? It's like, okay, well, I'll build $100 million agency. I'm like, there's 15. I'm like, you have to start understanding that. And, you know, when you start understanding public comps, I'm like, oh yeah, getting Ridge to $1 billion outcome is incredibly easy, right? Because there's just a countless list of consumer brands who've sold for $1 billion, right? And like, or publicly traded and worth $1 billion right now. We're in Austin. Yeti's my favorite brand. Yeti's worth about $4 billion right now. Or On Running, the shoe company, they're worth about $9 billion right now, right? Now, could I get Ridge to $100 billion? I'm like, there's only three outcomes in consumer that are $100 billion that aren't roll-ups, right? Like, you know, P&G or whatever else. Hermes is worth, you know, 170 or whatever. Nike's worth like 140. And then you got Lululemon around 50, right? Lululemon is worth more than Honda. When you start talking about like the multiple billions of dollars, the comps are crazy. So it's like Lululemon, the brand that makes leggings, is worth as much money as Honda, who makes cars, right? A global brand selling cars everywhere. So it's like when you start getting to consumer, it's like, oh, it's very hard to get consumer to $100 billion outcome, right? But there are businesses that can be that are $100 billion outcomes, right? You know, tech is the obvious example. There's fintech companies or banking companies that get there. Very large tech-enabled services like Uber, or you know, like legacy businesses, banking, insurance, whatever else.
So how far along is Ridge on that journey?
I've talked about this in other podcasts. We were offered multiple hundreds of $1 millions in the past, but this was peak 2021, 2022 bubble, right? I mean, I think if I wanted a $1 billion valuation on the business by 2026, we'll get that. So,
Wow.
and it's just a multiple of EBITDA, right? So, like, we are mid 8 figures in EBITDA. So when I get to 9 figures in EBITDA, you have a $1 billion business, right?
Very, very fascinating. And then it's cool that you've already planned out like your next thing.
I got like 20 things that kick around that I'm like, oh yeah, all of these could be at least a $10 billion business. And the biggest thing there is just picking your industry, right? Like, to start a business, you should pick something you love because you have to work on it every single day, right? So like, you know, you shouldn't just be like, oh, you know, the largest market caps are like, you know, Chase. I'm just going to build Chase. It's like, well, do you love banking? Do you love consumer and large scale banking? It's like, no, you've never done that before. I'm like, okay, well, let's not pick for market cap, right? Let's pick for something you actually want to do. But you have to like align what you want to do with like the highest possible outcome or whatever you want the outcome to be, right? And if you're like, hey, I just want to make $500,000 a year very passively, it's like, okay, you should build a service business, right? Like, I bet my pool guy's making $500,000 a year, right? Because he's got a bunch of different pool guys running around doing whatever. And it's like, so you should choose whatever your outcome is and then choose whatever your passion is, align those things. And I'll tell you, my pool guy is so passionate about pools. Like, he wants to talk about them all the time. And I'm like, dude, I don't care.
It's funny because the question that I get a lot is like, dude, how are you so ambitious? Like, one of my goals for this podcast is to sell out Madison Square Garden. And it sounds like you're trying to get $1 billion exit and then multiple 10x that or 100x that billion-dollar exits. Like that to me seems like a massive vision, and I think a lot of people are curious, like, how do I even dream that big?
I mean, someone's got to do it. It's like Madison like breaking down your goal. This is like the operator in me. It's like, no, we can just break that down, man. It's like
19,763 people. All right, well, if I get that on each episode and then I continue to scale that up, and then I'm going to need more than 19,763 people to actually get those in the stadium. They all have to be in New York. I might have, like there's a lot of things that go on, but it's just an equation, right?
Dude, 100%. It's like, and like what I go to is Madison Square Garden has to sell tickets every night. Like they have a business. Yes. They need people in those seats. So it's like they don't care if it's you or if it's a sports game or if it's a rodeo. They're like, we just need to and you're like, okay, cool. Can I have Thursday 3 years from now? And like I'll make sure people show up. So yeah, that's the whole thing. Is like every problem is solvable. And I think a lot of people when people are like, oh, why do you think you can do it? It's like, someone's got to fucking do it. Like, someone runs these consumer brands. You know what I mean? Like, and I've met people running at the very top, and I'm like, damn, dude, you're not very smart. That's